Hello, everybody. This is Monica Paolini from Sensafili, and today we're talking about the Open RAN ecosystem. And with me, I have Rafael Francis, and he is Senior Director of Product Line Management at Ciena. And we will talk about Open RAN in the sort of big picture, the end-to-end Open RAN architecture. And Rafael, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Monica. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And well, let's get started by why don't you give us some introduction in terms of what is that you're personally doing and what is that Ciena is doing in this field? At Ciena, you're doing a lot of things. So how does what do you relate to Open RAN?
Yeah, no problem. So Ciena is a global provider of networking systems, software, and services. And in the context of 5G, we focus on providing transport network solutions, automation, and services for both public 5G and private 5G. And in that context of 5G, we're looking to help advance Open RAN adoption in the industry. And there's a number of things we'll get into that we're doing in that space. But that's really, the main focus. I know today's conversation will focus more on the transport piece than some of the other things that Ciena has in our offering. But that, in a nutshell, is what we provide in the overall 5G ecosystem.
Yes, and I'm currently working on a report on the whole ecosystem. There is much more of Open RAN and the CU and DU. There's a lot, and transport. It's really an absolutely crucial element, not only because it's necessary, but because it really shapes what is the specific architecture of an Open RAN network. So let's start with, from the outside, in a sense of how do you work in terms of with the other players to make sure that this happens? Because nobody can do it on its own. This requires an effort of many players. How do you work with the ecosystem?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to your point, transport's really just one piece of the puzzle, and arguably it's not the most complex piece. Obviously, other parts of the ecosystem like RAN have more hurdles to overcome, but transport is an important piece. And if you look at some of these Open RAN architectures, the lines really start to blur between RAN and transport. And without that proper transport connectivity, the system of disaggregated components that is this Open RAN wouldn't work properly. So, but nonetheless, because transport is just one piece of the puzzle, we are collaborating and partnering with other vendors, system integrators, RAN vendors, et cetera, to position these Open RAN solutions into both public and private wireless segments. So for example, last year we announced our partnership with Samsung, who's obviously a major RAN vendor in the industry. And with Samsung, we've done things like, pre-validated, tested, pre-integrated solutions in our labs to ensure proper interoperability, Open RAN functioning. We're working with multiple other smaller RAN vendors. And in general, in the industry, we're also participating in these Open RAN plug fests. If you've seen those, O-RAN Alliance hosts some plug fests. So we participated in some of those that were hosted in, for example, Telefónica's labs in Madrid, where multiple vendors come together, interconnect their different solutions, and we ensure interoperability and basically prove out Open RAN concepts.
Yeah, and I guess that because with Open RAN, with disaggregation, there are more vendors that can participate. You're obviously going to be working with sort of the bigger name vendors, the Samsungs and others, but also with new vendors. How do you see this new vendors coming in? Because I guess that for you, it's different. You're going to have a higher number of vendors you're going to have to deal with.
Sure. Yeah, and I've mentioned some vendors that we work with, like Samsung, but it's important from a transport perspective, of course, that we are neutral or agnostic as to what vendors there are in the network from a RAN perspective, from a mobile core perspective. And so that's important. I mean, it's in essence one of the spirit of Open RAN, right? To ensure standardized interfaces and interoperability across this whole ecosystem. So yeah, there's new vendors emerging in this space, and you know, you have vendors that you have the established players in the industry, the RAN vendors, and then you have new entrants that focused on, for example, just trying to enable virtualized RAN or Open RAN, and maybe they didn't have legacy, you know, radios or baseband systems. And so it is very much of an ecosystem. And again, we've with Open RAN and with adherence to standards like the O-RAN Alliance, in theory, this should all interoperate. I think in practice, it's taking, you know, more time, and operators are implementing Open RAN in phases. We'll talk a little more about that, but for sure, it necessitates an ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem of vendors. We have, for example, 5G Innovation Lab in our facilities where we bring in different vendors and we prove out solutions, in addition to participating in some of those broader, you know, industry initiatives and plug fests that I mentioned.
How much, you know, as you go through this, clearly, you know, you have a, you know, different, you know, tests with different vendors. How do you see it going? How much variability? How much of a challenge is it? Because clearly it is challenging to have more vendors all in the same network. So how is it going from your point of view?
In general, good. I think, you know, sometimes Open RAN is often goes hand in hand with Cloud RAN or virtualized RAN. Those are two somewhat independent things, right? You can have a virtualized RAN that is not open, and you can have an Open RAN that is not virtualized. But oftentimes operators are looking to move to Open RAN, or also at the same time looking to leverage virtualization, right? So as they disaggregate these RAN elements, and they want to standardize interfaces between these different components to avoid vendor lock-in, et cetera, that also paves the way for these components to become virtualized. So the reason I bring that up is because there are sometimes challenges, and you're looking to optimize performance and you're looking to work through interoperability, but it's hard to tell at times, is that because of the virtualized RAN implementation, or is that because of Open RAN? I think it has more to do, frankly, with virtualized RAN sometimes. And we've been doing a lot of work there, not only with public MNO deployments, but also private 5G in our labs with our system integration team. But you know, you get to the point where, you know, it's functioning well and you're optimizing performance. And even though there are some kinks to work out in the early going. So again, I think it's sometimes those challenges get intertwined, moving to virtualized RAN and moving to Open RAN at the same time.
Now you bring up a very important issue of the different flavors, so to say, of, or should I say, RAN, not just Open RAN, because we often think about it's either traditional RAN or Open RAN, but there's a lot of I wouldn't say middle ground. They're just different levels, as you say. You know, is it virtualized, not virtualized? Can you tell us a little bit about through that, and what is the implication for transport, depending on the different?
Yeah. So for transport, you know, our design philosophy for our 5G xhaul transport portfolio was really, you know, to build in the flexibility to enable operators to evolve their networks in different ways. So there's multiple dimensions to this, as we're saying. You know, there's going from closed RANs to Open RANs. There's going from physical RANs to virtualized RANs. There's going from distributed RAN to centralized RAN, and combinations of all the above might exist in a single network. So the transport network really needs to be a flexible fabric to interconnect all these different components that an operator is going to have, different technologies, vendors, architectures. And so, you know, the support for that comes in different forms. So, for example, our solutions can do things like help evolve legacy radios that might have proprietary interfaces like CPRI to new O-RAN based basebands, because you may start by upgrading the baseband, but you're going to have existing radios that you can't just, you know, upgrade or you know, phase out overnight. So sometimes that need to interwork CPRI radios with an O-RAN baseband is necessary, and the transport can play a role in that. You need to have the ability to support more diverse timing distribution and synchronization implementations with Open RAN. As you disaggregate the RAN and you centralize some components, oftentimes timing distribution happens from that more centralized place and gets distributed. The transport plays an important part in providing that timing, that synchronization, and some of the more stringent requirements that 5G has for that. And also, network slicing. Operators, I think, in order to better monetize all their 5G investments, all the money they spend in spectrum, in deploying new radios and laying fiber, they need new revenue streams, and network slicing is viewed as a way to help monetize and generate some of those new revenue streams with customers like enterprise business customers. So the flexibility to support different network slicing mechanisms also comes into play. So I think all those things, have an impact on the transport, and transport can be a key part of enabling these Open RAN and more advanced 5G type services.
Yes, because sometimes, and I remember a while ago talking to an operator, and they were, all excited about 5G, but then we're like, no, we don't want it because we don't have the transport. So it's like, no, we can't. So it could, if it's not done properly, it could be a serious bottleneck. It's not like you can make up for it. And so sometimes we just think about like low latency and all, how nice it is to have this, and this, but if you don't have, like, for instance, synchronization, it doesn't work.
That's right. Sometimes it's taken for granted, but it can, it's important. Otherwise, the transport could be a blocker to getting to where you want to be for 5G, right? New services like URLLC, is the transport ready for that, right? So you need to lay the foundation now for a transport network that's sufficiently future-proof to handle those new services, whether it's network slicing, URLLC, et cetera. I think it's critical.
Yes, and because it's not like you can necessarily do it overnight.
That's right.
You need to be ready when, or at least it has to be all part of the same process. And I guess so. And there are two things here. There is space and time. So you need to be ready today for what you want to do later. And so I'm going to first ask you. So let's go over the time, and then we go over the space dimension. So how can you prepare in terms of time? What should most operators are not going to do Open RAN in a massive way tomorrow.
Right.
But they need to be ready. So how can they get ready?
Sure. Yeah, I think as with 5G in general, Open RAN is going to be a journey, and I think that different regions, different operators, different vendors are adopting it, supporting it at different rates. So it will take time for broad market adoption. But from our experience in engaging with these operators, we are seeing that, for example, Open RAN adoption may start. In some cases, they'll start with new spectrum bands that they're deploying, because new spectrum becomes available when you're deploying new radios. Well, that's an opportunity to spec that in, right, to those new radios that you're selecting from your vendors. We want support for Open RAN. It may be with the small cells that they're using for densification. They start specifying, Open RAN support in those small cells, or they may start with private 5G before they start with their public MNO network. So I think there's different approaches to it. The fact is, though, because it is a phased approach, networks are going to be a hybrid, right? You'll have multiple and diverse architectures, for a period of time. But those are some of the things that we're seeing, and I think some operators are a lot more public about their Open RAN plans and POCs that they're doing or deployments, while other operators are issuing RFPs and they have requirements for O-RAN compliant components or baseband, or they're looking for a virtualized Open RAN, solution. And so they're building the foundation for Open RAN, but that they may or may not be publicizing it. We see that in some cases. And as they move to adopt Open RAN in whatever context or scenario that I was describing, they might choose to start, they might often start with a single vendor, right? So an Open RAN radio and, an Open, RAN baseband, maybe it's virtualized, maybe it's not, from the same vendor, just to begin, proving that out. And then over time, because they've standardized on those interfaces, look to introduce other vendors, mix and match. But these are some of the ways in which we see, operators getting started as they grow towards, greater and greater levels of adoption.
Absolutely. And so they need to get ready. Now, for the equipment, I said they might have in a single vendor, so they might have a sort of a open RAN ready
Mhm.
solution. Is this
Cor-
sort of an equivalent for transport? It is open RAN ready transport, or is
Yeah,
it?
yeah. So, well, from a transport perspective, again, there's certainly things that have to happen, and so from a transport perspective, we're helping operators lay that foundation. So maybe we're seeing, maybe they're starting with an architecture that, they're splitting the RAN, but they're putting the DU at the radio site, and maybe they centralize the CU, so they're not fully centralizing the architecture. So you have a mid-haul component that you're supporting and backhaul, but you're not necessarily in the front haul. But over time, those operators may look to want to further, evolve beyond those first steps and centralize more components. So you need to have a solution that's ready for front haul or mixes of front haul, mid haul, and backhaul, and we call that xhaul. And so front haul, as you know, is very latency sensitive, and so more so than mid haul, and certainly much more so than backhaul. And so you need to have an xhaul foundation that can support those low latencies for things like front haul, and those timing and sync capabilities to be able to hand off sync directly to radios, as opposed to just between the baseband and maybe the UPF or other core elements. So having those capabilities, is important in order to lay that foundation, because you will have these mixes of mid-haul, backhaul, front haul, in some cases even at the same radio site for different bands of spectrum, or even certainly within the same network, where maybe an operator in some more rural parts chooses to deploy more distributed RAN architecture, and then in more dense urban areas deploys more of a centralized RAN architecture, moving to open RAN.
Yes, and I guess that you start already talking about the space element, so that not all operators will deploy open RAN at the same pace in terms of timeline, but also
Right.
within network, you're not going to have open RAN everywhere unless you are a Rakuten or a Dish, where it's greenfield, so you have more flexibility.
Exactly.
But not only they have a legacy, but also they have different needs in different places. So how do you see operators deploying open RAN and getting ready for it within their own network, in different parts of the network?
Yeah. So again, I think it's I think it's a function of where they're choosing to maybe focus their investments. I think I'd mentioned that, we saw a good example recently in North America is the C-band auction that took place. And now we're seeing, and obviously that mid-band spectrum is, kind of hits that right sweet spot in terms of the balance of coverage and performance, right, between low band and high band. And so that's going to be key, I think, to achieving high capacity, coverage nationwide in markets like the US. And I think the same will happen in other markets, and maybe parts of APAC already has, and Asia Pacific. But so for example, with those new C-band deployments, we've seen operators take a much more focused approach in specifying that they want support for open RAN based technologies, radios, so on and so forth. So I think deploying that new spectrum is an important area. We've been involved that's with public MNOs, and we're deployed in some of those networks that are using those radios. In private 5G, we're seeing a lot of POCs take place, because obviously with private wireless, most of the deployments today are still, I think private wireless is mostly LTE, but we're starting to see more 5G. And those, we're seeing a lot of interest in the open RAN based radios. And concepts like 5G in a box, where you have your virtualized RAN elements, you have your compact mobile core for enterprise on-prem, maybe you have a cloud-based core in other respects. You have some, you have xhaul transport there, maybe even have MEC applications in that 5G in a box. So those tend to be more open RAN based, those POCs. So that's another example where we're seeing it, in addition to, I would say small cells being deployed for new small cells that are being deployed for densification, moving towards open RAN in those first.
Yes. So if you were to tell the listeners, what is that is special about what you do that sets you apart in terms of the Open RAN support?
Yeah, in our case, again, I think it's how we have designed our 5G xhaul portfolio that we've introduced a couple years ago, with the vision of how networks are going to evolve to Open RAN, to to more Cloud RAN architectures, and with Cloud RAN, the lines blur between RAN and transport. So you have to be able to enable that move to Open RAN. So we help operators really evolve their network to Open RAN at the pace in which they want to evolve it. It lays the foundation that transport network has the flexibility to move from closed and proprietary to Open RAN, and even interwork between those. It has the ability to enable the timing and synchronization that we've talked about that's needed for 5G in these Open RAN environments. It's about enabling new services, whether it's URLLC, enabling network slicing, so helping to monetize new revenue streams. On the orchestration side, if you think of slicing, our Blue Planet portfolio complements our xhaul portfolio and can act as a multi-domain orchestrator for things like slices, and interconnect the RAN to the transport to the core, because our philosophy is slicing is really about the end-to-end. And how do you stitch all those things together? And that's where some of our partnerships with RAN and core vendors also comes in, because now we can integrate our orchestration components as well, and deliver those slices end to end. I think those are really the ways. And in general, that's in terms of our products, our solutions and services. But from an industry perspective, I feel like we're doing our part to enable Open RAN adoption. We're members and contributors of groups like the O-RAN Alliance. We're contributors in multiple working groups, co-chairs of one of the working groups. We're members of Open RAN Policy Coalition, 5G Americas, that is doing its part also to help O-RAN adoption. I mentioned we participate in these O-RAN Alliance plug fests. So those are a number of things that we're doing to help the industry move forward.
A very final question. You said
Sure.
that it is a journey to Open RAN. It's not just a one-stop thing. So in terms of the overall industry, where's the next stop before we get to the end of the journey?
Yeah, I think we're going to see progressive levels of adoption of Open RAN. In general, I think in 5G, we're really still, we like to think of 5G adoption in phases. There was early 5G, light the indicator on your phone that says it's 5G, but you're not necessarily seeing the huge performance benefits. Then achieve that. The next phase is get that coverage, get that capacity, so you're covering everybody and achieving higher bandwidth. But that's still EMBB for the most part. The next phase, the advanced 5G, is still in front of us, and Open RAN is going to play a role in that, because it's about enabling an ecosystem and helping to drive innovation in the industry. So as we talk about new services, like URLLC and network slicing, which I mentioned, but in general, when you think of some of the higher layer applications like immersive gaming, augmented reality, connected vehicles, cellular V2X, all these things, I think those are all to come. And I think Open RAN will play a role in that, because again, Open RAN is also about helping operators, drive down costs of their solutions. And I think unless they can see the ROI for investing in their infrastructure, we won't get to see all those advanced services as soon as we would like to. So I think that's really, what's next is broader adoption. And again, that's being phased. It's going to take time to help enable these new services and help operators monetize. And we're a big part of that. So we're open by design with our solutions. We have our flexible xhaul portfolio. And then we have, our ecosystem partners that I've talked about, things like our Blue Planet 5G automation solution. So we feel like, we're helping our partners, our customers, take the industry forward and realize that true full vision of 5G that we're still striving for.
Excellent. Well, Rafael, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate it. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening in. This interview is part of a report, a deep dive report by Sensafili on the Open RAN ecosystem, and you can get that at sensafili.com. Thank you again.
Thanks.